Benjamin Rush was a founding father of the United States. Rush was a civic leader in Philadelphia, where he was a physician, politician, social reformer, educator and humanitarian, as well as the founder of Dickinson College in Carlisle, Pennsylvania. Rush attended the Continental Congress and signed the Declaration of Independence. His latest self-description was, he aimed right, quote, "He served as Surgeon General in the Continental Army." Rush became a professor of chemistry, medical theory, and clinical practice at the University of Pennsylvania. Rush was a leader of the American Enlightenment, and an enthusiastic supporter of the American Revolution. He was a leader in Pennsylvania's ratification of the Constitution in 1788. He was prominent in many reforms, especially in the areas of medicine and education. He opposed slavery, advocated free public schools, and sought improved education for women and a more enlightened penal system. As a leading physician, Rush had a major impact on the emerging medical profession. As an Enlightenment intellectual, he was committed to organizing all medical knowledge around explanatory theories, rather than rely on empirical methods. Rush argued that illness was the result of imbalances in the body's physical system and was caused by malfunctions in the brain. His approach prepared the way for later medical research, but Rush himself undertook none of it. He promoted public health by advocating clean environment and stressing the importance of personal and military hygiene. His study of mental disorder made him one of the founders of American psychiatry. Early life and career. Benjamin Rush was born to John Rush and Susanna Hall on January 4, 1746. The family, which included 7 children, lived on a plantation in the township of Byberry in Philadelphia County, then about 14 miles outside Philadelphia. Benjamin was the 4th of the 7 children. John Rush died in July 1751 at the age of 39. He went peacefully, saying over and over, "Lord, Lord, Lord," and his wife saw him buried as he wished in the cemetery behind Christ Church, leaving his mother, who ran a country store, to care for the large family. At 8 years of age, Benjamin was sent to live with an aunt and uncle, to receive a proper education. Benjamin and his older brother Jacob attended a school in Cecil County, Maryland, run by the Rev. Samuel Finley, which would later become West Nottingham Academy. In 1760, after further studies at the College of New Jersey, Rush graduated with a Bachelor of Arts degree. From 1761 to 1766, Rush apprenticed under Dr. John Redman in Philadelphia. Redman encouraged him to further his studies at the University of Edinburgh in Scotland, where Rush studied from 1766 to 1768 and earned a M.D. degree. Rush became fluent in French, Italian, and Spanish as a result of his studies and European tour. While at Edinburgh, he became a friend of the Earl of Leven and his family, including William Leslie. Returning to the colonies in 1769, Rush opened a medical practice in Philadelphia and became professor of chemistry at the College of Philadelphia. Rush ultimately published the first American textbook on chemistry, several volumes on medical student education, and wrote influential patriotic essays. Revolutionary period. Rush was active in the Sons of Liberty and was elected to attend the provincial conference to send delegates to the Continental Congress. Thomas Paine consulted Rush when writing the profoundly influential pro-independence pamphlet Common Sense. Rush represented Pennsylvania and signed the Declaration of Independence. He also represented Philadelphia at Pennsylvania's own constitutional convention, and got into trouble when he criticized the new Pennsylvania Constitution of 1776. While Rush was representing Pennsylvania in the Continental Congress, he also used his medical skills in the field. Rush accompanied the Philadelphia militia during the battles after which the British occupied Philadelphia and most of New Jersey, and the Continental Congress fled to York, Pennsylvania. He is remembered for his service after the Battle of Princeton by the artist John Trumbull. The Army Medical Service was in disarray. Between the military casualties, extremely high losses due to typhoid, yellow fever and other camp illnesses, political conflicts between Drive John Morgan and Dr. William Shippen, Jr., and inadequate supplies and guidance from the medical committee. Nonetheless, Rush accepted an appointment as Surgeon General of the Middle Department of the Continental Army. Rush's order, Directions for Preserving the Health of Soldiers, became one of the foundations of preventive military medicine and was repeatedly republished, including as late as 1908. However, Rush's reporting of Dr. Shippen's misappropriation of food and wine supplies intended to comfort hospitalized soldiers, underreporting of patient deaths, and failure to visit the hospitals under his command, ultimately led to Rush's resignation in 1778. Campaign against General Washington. Rush criticized General George Washington in two handwritten but unsigned letters while still serving under the Surgeon General. One, to Virginia Governor Patrick Henry, dated January 12, 1778, quoted General Thomas Conway saying that if not for God's grace the ongoing war would have been lost by Washington and his weak counselors. Henry forwarded the letter to Washington, despite Rush's request that the criticism be conveyed orally, and Washington recognized the handwriting. At the time, the Conway cabal was trying to replace Washington with Horatio Gates as commander-in-chief. The letter also relayed General Sullivan's criticism that forces directly under Washington were undisciplined and mob-like, and contrasted Gates' army as a well-regulated family. 10 days later, Rush wrote to John Adams relaying complaints inside Washington's army, including about bad bread, no order, universal disgust, and praising Conway, who had been appointed Inspector General. Shippen sought Rush's resignation, and received it by the end of the month after Continental Congress delegate John Witherspoon, chairman of a committee to investigate Morgan's and Rush's charges of misappropriation and mismanagement against Shippen, told Rush his complaints would not produce reform. Rush later expressed regret for his gossip against Washington. In a letter to John Adams in 1812, Rush wrote, "He was the highly favored instrument whose patriotism and name contributed greatly to the establishment of the independence of the United States." Rush also successfully pleaded with Washington's biographers Judge Bushrod Washington and Chief Justice John Marshall to delete his association with those stinging words. In his book 1776, David McCulloch quotes Rush, referring to George Washington. The Philadelphia physician and patriot Benjamin Rush, a staunch admirer, observed that Washington has so much martial dignity in his deportment that you would distinguish him to be a general and a soldier from among 10,000 people. There is not a king in Europe that would not look like a valet de chambre by his side. Post-revolution, in 1783 he was appointed to the staff of Pennsylvania Hospital, of which he remained a member until his death. He was elected to the Pennsylvania Convention, which adopted the federal constitution, and was appointed treasurer of the U.S. Mint, serving from 1797 to 1813. He was elected a Fellow of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences in 1788. He became Professor of Medical Theory and Clinical Practice at the University of Pennsylvania in 1791. Though the quality of his medicine was quite primitive even for the time, he advocated bleeding long after its practice had declined. He became a social activist, an abolitionist, and was the most well-known physician in America at the time of his death. He was also founder of the private liberal arts college Dickinson College, in Carlisle, Pennsylvania. In 1794, he was elected a foreign member of the Royal Swedish Academy of Sciences. Rush was a founding member of the Philadelphia Society for Alleviating the Miseries of Public Prisons, which greatly influenced the construction of Eastern State Penitentiary in Philadelphia. Corps of Discovery. In 1803, Thomas Jefferson sent Meriwether Lewis to Philadelphia to prepare for the Lewis and Clark expedition under the tutelage of Rush, who taught Lewis about frontier illnesses and the performance of bloodletting. Rush provided the Corps with a medical kit that included Turkish opium for nervousness, emetics to induce vomiting, medicinal wine, 50 dozen of Dr. Rush's bilious pills, laxatives containing more than 50% mercury, which have since colloquially been referred to as thunderclappers. The meat-rich diet and lack of clean water during the expedition gave them encores to use them frequently, though their efficacy is questionable. The high mercury content provided an excellent tracer by which archaeologists have been able to track the corpse's actual route to the Pacific. Reforms. Anti-slavery. In 1766, when Rush set out for his studies in Edinburgh, he was outraged by the sight of 100 slave ships in Liverpool Harbour. As a prominent Presbyterian doctor and professor of chemistry in Philadelphia, he provided a bold and respected voice against the slave trade that could not be ignored. He warmly praised the ministry of Black Harry Hosier, the freedman circuit rider who accompanied Bishop John Asbury during the establishment of the Methodist Church in America. But the highlight of his involvement was the pamphlet he read in 1773 entitled An Address to the Inhabitants of the British Settlements in America, upon slave keeping. In this first of his many attacks on the social evils of his day, he not only assailed the slave trade, but the entire institution of slavery. Rush argued scientifically that Negroes were not by nature intellectually or morally inferior. Any apparent evidence to the contrary was only the perverted expression of slavery, which is so foreign to the human mind that the moral faculties, as well as those of the understanding, are debased and rendered torpid by it. In 1792, Rush read a paper before the American Philosophical Society which argued that the color and figure of blacks were derived from a form of leprosy. He argued that with proper treatment, blacks could be cured and become white. Despite his public condemnations of slavery, Rush purchased a slave named William Gruber in 1776. To the consternation of many, Rush still owned Gruber when he joined the Pennsylvania Abolition Society in 1784. Capital punishment. Rush deemed public punishment such as putting a person on display in stocks, common at the time, to be counterproductive. He proposed instead private confinement, labor, solitude, and religious instruction for criminals. In addition, he opposed the death penalty. His outspoken opposition to capital punishment pushed the Pennsylvania legislature to abolish the death penalty for all crimes other than first-degree murder. He authored a 1792 treatise on punishing murder by death in which he made three principal arguments. Every man possesses an absolute power over his own liberty and property, but not over his own life. 2. The punishment of murder by death is contrary to reason, and to the order and happiness of society. 3. The punishment of murder by death is contrary to divine revelation. Rush led the state of Pennsylvania to establish the first state penitentiary, the Walnut Street Prison, in 1790. Rush campaigned for long-term imprisonment, the denial of liberty, as both the most humane but severe punishment. This 1792 treatise was preceded by comments on the efficacy of the death penalty that he self-references and which evidently appeared in the second volume of the American Museum. Status of women. After the Revolution, Rush proposed a new model of education for elite women that included English language, vocal music, dancing, sciences, bookkeeping, history, and moral philosophy. He was instrumental to the founding of the Young Ladies' Academy of Philadelphia, the first chartered women's institution of higher education in Philadelphia. Rush saw little need for training women in metaphysics, logic, mathematics, or advanced science. Rather, he wanted the emphasis on guiding women toward moral essays, poetry, history, and religious writings. This type of education for elite women grew dramatically during the post-revolutionary period, as women claimed a role in creating the Republic, and so, the ideal of Republican motherhood emerged, lauding women's responsibility of instructing the young in the obligations of patriotism, the blessings of liberty, and the true meaning of republicanism. He opposed coeducational classrooms and insisted on the need to instruct all youth in the Christian religion. Contributions to medicine. Although anatomy was well understood by Rush's time, the causes of disease remained elusive. Physicians therefore relied on various unscientific treatments. Although Rush continued these practices, he also actively sought new explanations and new approaches to treatment, some of which remain influential, and others of which seem incredible today. The third edition of Rush's Observations, a 4-volume compilation published in 1812, calling for humane treatment of the mentally ill, is available digitally here. Physical medicine. Rush was a leading proponent of heroic medicine, and firmly believed in such practices as bleeding patients, as well as purges using calomel and other toxic substances. In his report on the Philadelphia yellow fever epidemic of 1793, Rush wrote, "I have found bleeding to be useful, not only in cases where the pulse was full and quick, but where it was slow and tense. I have bled twice in many, and in one acute case 4 times, with the happiest effect. I consider intrepidity in the use of the lancet, at present, to be necessary, as it is in the use of mercury and julep, in this insidious and ferocious disease." During that epidemic, Rush gained acclaim for remaining in town and treating sometimes 100 patients per day, but many died. Even Rush acknowledged the failure of 2 treatments: sweats in vinegar-wrapped blankets accompanied by mercury rubs, and cold baths. William Cobbett vociferously objected to Rush's extreme use of bloodletting, and even in Rush's day and location, many physicians had abandoned on scientific grounds this favorite remedy of Rush's former teachers Thomas Sydenham and Herman Boerhaave. Cobbett accused Rush of killing more patients than he had saved. Rush ultimately sued Cobbett for libel, winning a judgment of $5,000 and $3,000 in court costs, which was only partially paid before Cobbett returned to England. Nonetheless, Rush's practice waned as he continued to advocate bloodletting and purges, much to the chagrin of his friend Thomas Jefferson. Some even blamed Rush's bleeding for hastening the death of Benjamin Franklin, as well as George Washington, and Rush insisted upon being bled himself shortly before his death. Rush also read the first case report on dengue fever. However, his greatest contributions to physical medicine now appear to have been his establishment of a public dispensary for low-income patients, and public works associated with draining and rerouting Dock Creek. Rush concocted a mixture of calomel, chlorine, julep and mercury to create a proprietary purgative which he named Dr. Rush's Thunderbolts. It was used by Captain Meriwether Lewis II, Lieutenant William Clark during their expedition to the Pacific coast. Another of Rush's medical views that now draws criticism is his analysis of race. In reviewing the case of Henry Moss, a slave who lost his dark skin color, Rush characterized being black as a hereditary and curable skin disease. Rush read that whites should not tyrannize over, for the disease should entitle them to a double portion of humanity. However, by the same token, whites should not intermarry with them, for this would tend to infect posterity with the disorder. Attempts must be made to cure the disease. Rush was interested in Native American health. He wanted to find out why Native Americans were very susceptible to certain illnesses and whether they suffered from higher mortality rates as compared to civilized people. Other questions that he raised was whether or not they dreamt more or if the hair turned gray as they got older. His fascination with these people came from his interest in the theory that social scientists can better study the history of their own civilization by studying cultures in earlier states of development. Primitive men. In his autobiography he writes from a review of the 3 different species of settlers. It appears that there are certain regular stages which mark the progress from the savage to civilized life. The first settler is nearly related to an Indian in his manners. In the second, the Indian manners are more diluted. It is in the third species only that we behold civilization completed. It is to the third species of settlers only that it is proper to apply the term of farmers. While we record the vices of the first and second settlers, it is but just to mention the virtues likewise. The mutual wants produce mutual dependence, hence they are kind and friendly to each other. The solitary situation makes visitors agreeable to them, hence they are hospitable to stranger. Mental health. Father of American psychiatry. Rush is considered the father of American psychiatry, publishing the first textbook on the subject in the United States. Medical inquiries and observations upon the diseases of the mind. He undertook to classify different forms of mental illness and to theorize as to the causes and possible cures. Rush believed that many mental illnesses were caused by disruptions of the blood circulation, or by sensory overload, and treated them with devices meant to improve circulation to the brain such as a centrifugal spinning board, and inactivity, sensory deprivation via a restraining chair with a sensory deprivation head enclosure. After seeing mental patients in appalling conditions in the Pennsylvania hospital, Rush led a successful campaign in 1792 for the state to build a separate mental ward where the patients could be kept in more humane conditions. Rush believed, as did so many physicians of the time, that bleeding and active purging with mercury chloride were the preferable medical treatments for insanity, a fact evidenced by his statement that it is sometimes difficult to prevail upon patients in this state of madness, or even to compel them to take mercury in any of the ways in which it is usually administered. In these cases I have succeeded by sprinkling a few grains of calomel daily upon a piece of bread, and afterwards spreading over it a thin covering of butter. While Rush followed the standard procedures of bleeding and treatment with mercury, he did not believe that coercion and restraint, the physical punishment, chains and dungeons, which were the practice of the time, were the answer. He took patients from that drudgery and placed them in a normal hospital setting. This alone resulted in a number of patients recovering sufficiently to return to society. For this reason, some aspects of his approach could be seen as similar to moral therapy, which would soon rise to prominence in at least the wealthier institutions of Europe and the United States. Rush is sometimes considered a pioneer of occupational therapy, particularly as it pertains to the institutionalized. In Diseases of the Mind, Rush wrote, "It has been remarked that the maniacs of the male sex in all hospitals, who assist in cutting wood, making building fires and digging in a garden, and the females who are employed in washing, ironing, and scrubbing floors often recover, while persons whose rank exempts them from performing such services languish away their lives within the walls of the hospital. Furthermore, Rush was one of the first people to describe savant syndrome. In 1789 he described the abilities of Thomas Fuller, a lightning calculator. His observation would later be described in other individuals by notable scientists like John Langdon Down. Rush pioneered the therapeutic approach to addiction. Prior to his work, drunkenness was viewed as being sinful and a matter of choice. Rush believed that the alcoholic loses control over himself and identified the properties of alcohol, rather than the alcoholic's choice, as the causal agent. He developed the conception of alcoholism as a form of medical disease and proposed that alcoholics should be weaned from their addiction via less potent substances. In honor of his service to mental health, the American Psychiatric Association uses Rush's image as part of the SEAL educational legacy. During his career, he educated over 3,000 medical students, and several of these established Rush Medical College in his honor after his death. One of his last apprentices was Samuel A. Cartwright, later a Confederate States of America surgeon charged with improving sanitary conditions in the camps around Vicksburg, Mississippi, and Port Hudson, Louisiana. Rush University Medical Center in Chicago, formerly Rush Presbyterian Street, Luke's Medical Center, was named in his honor.